Good evening, everyone. I'm Lisa Johnson. I'm the founder of Private School Village. We're just going to let people slowly join the call, and then we'll get started. While we're having people join, I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping points. So we are recording this discussion, and we are going to put the link up on our PSV YouTube channel no later than tomorrow. We're also going to be using the Q&A function during the discussion. However, there were quite a bit of questions submitted in advance, so we're going to give prioritization to those and to those questions that were asked most frequently. And lastly, I just wanted to take a moment, as people are still joining the call, to ask the PSV community in particular and anyone else on the call to please lift up one of our families, the Medford family, and the Crossroads community. Last week, Summer Medford passed away, and they are going to need our ongoing love and support and thoughts and well wishes. And if you are able, they have also set up a GoFundMe campaign to support expenses. And if you need that link, you can go to our Private School Village social media pages. You can email me. I'm happy to send you back the link as well, but just please keep them in your thoughts and prayers. Just a few minutes more, seconds more. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So tonight we are talking about emerging realities facing independent schools. And again, my name is Lisa Johnson, and I'm the founder of Private School Village, but I'm also a mom of two at Campbell Hall. And like many of you, I'm doing the best I can to understand and prepare for what the fall might look like. Many of our schools have started to share plans, and that's great. When you juxtapose that against what we're also seeing on the news, I find myself often still spiraling because it just seems so all over the place, the uncertainty, the state of flux. And the reality is we have to get comfortable kind of with that, because that state of flux is our reality, and we have to trust that our schools are considering a range of possible scenarios given that state of flux. And I think that's hard for everyone. But tonight, I think that's why tonight's going to be so important and special. We get to hear from two career administrators and educators whose experience is unmatched. And if there were ever two people who could help parents in particular feel a little more informed, a little more reassured, it would be Reveta Bowers and Cathy Shelburne. Reveta graciously joined us about a month ago for another webinar, and she left us wanting more, so she agreed to come back. I joke with her a little bit and say that she's the Oprah Winfrey of the independent school system. But I say that because she really doesn't need much introduction. People know and love and respect her internationally. And so even personally, a lot of the work that Private School Village is trying to do is largely off of her work and her legacy in her 40+ year career with the Center for Early Education, of which I have to acknowledge that she is returning to very shortly. And so we're excited that we get to engage with her in the new interim position that she's assuming. So I'm thrilled to keep working with her. And then Cathy is someone who I think a lot of parents may not know. She is someone who works a lot with mostly leadership in independent schools at the California Association of Independent Schools. And so she's kind of behind the scenes most recently, but she has a lengthy resume as administrator, as an educator, and her experience is obviously central to tonight's discussion. So ladies, welcome and thank you for joining us, Reveta and Cathy. I'm going to kick this off by asking Reveta initially if she will answer just a very high level question. How do you see schools possibly changing because of what they've experienced and learned since the distancing of their programs for students and families?
Well, I think schools have learned a lot. Parents have learned a lot. Teachers have learned a lot, and they're learning more every day. You know, one of the reasons we called this program the changing landscape rather than the new normal is we have no idea what schools are going to look like, but they're going to be changed. When you have profound experiences, it does change the fabric of institutions. And so wherever schools find themselves, they've learned a lot. And parents have learned a lot. Parents have learned how hard it is to be a teacher. Teachers have learned how difficult it is to reach out and really touch and connect with children across a screen and in a virtual space. And I think schools have begun to understand that the changes that families are experiencing during COVID are shaping their attitudes and their questions for schools. And so schools need to be more transparent, more communicative, more accessible, and more readily apparent in explaining the decisions they're making and how they're making them. So we're going to see schools doing lots of things differently because they have no choice. And they're pivoting just as they pivoted when they had to close schools so that we could go into isolation. They're going to pivot in reaction to what they experience as they decide to open, whether it's going to be homeschooling again, whether it's going to, and virtual, whether it's going to be a hybrid system, or whether they're going to try and have kids back on campus.
Excellent. Yeah, that ongoing communication is going to be key. Cathy, what do you think? How are schools possibly changing because of what they've experienced and learned since the distancing of their programs for students and families?
I think Reveta captured very succinctly some of the ways in which schools will be changing. Certainly, we have heard many conversations around different scheduling options. We've heard terms used in different ways than we heard them used before, terms like cohorting. So schools are thinking about maybe using their physical facilities differently or repurposing some of the facilities that just enable to, in order to be able to accommodate physical distancing requirements to have students on campus. So I think those are some of the things that we'll be seeing and hearing more about as we move through the summer months and closer to the opening of school.
Excellent. So, Reveta, what are some of the board level concerns, and how are heads thinking strategically with their boards given the changing dynamics of all of this? What is top of mind for them?
Well, a clear partnership between the head of school and the board is essential right now. Those are the two leadership arms of a school. And so they need to work closely together, because one of the things we've discovered that's a change for schools is how much COVID is costing schools. As they prepare for school to open in whatever form, they're needing more personnel to do things. Supplies, schools are ordering tons of supplies, personal protection equipment, temperature gauges, all kinds of cleaning supplies. They're adding cleaning staff. They're communicating much more regularly, hopefully with families. They are trying to make sure that they are as adaptable as possible. And they know that as they're starting to collect tuition for the next school year, they may lose some families. And so they're going to be going to their wait lists to replace those families and thinking about it. They're also changing policies and writing policies that families and kids and staff will need to abide by as they come back onto the campus. Policies around masks, policies around hours, policies around schedules, policies around privacy and certain notifications. So there are lots of things that are going to change. And schools are taking huge hits in their operating budgets as they prepare to open in the fall. They've kept many of them, their faculty on salary so that they could continue to run programs, but they also kept their staff on salary so that when they do open, you'll see familiar people in the schools. And that's really important, particularly for young children going back to school. So boards and heads are working very closely together as they look at those new policies, new procedures, and new rules for operation.
Excellent. Excuse me. So Cathy, before we started this, Cathy has quite a bit of Zoom experience. And so given all the Zoom meetings that you've conducted since schools closed due to COVID with the heads, board chairs, administrators, what are some of the issues that all of those constituencies are concerned about that arose during your Zoom seminars? Like, what are the top level things and the most challenging things they're dealing with?
Sure. So thank you, Lisa. And I also want to thank the private school village community for inviting me to participate in this forum this evening. Yes, Zoom meeting. So as part of my role at CIS, I hosted or co-hosted over 230 Zoom meetings since school closures began in mid-March. And those meetings were attended by CIS heads of school, trustees, administrators, and all of these sessions were dealing with some of the issues that arose amid the COVID-19 pandemic and the resultant school closures. And some of the top of mind issues that arose, and Lisa, you mentioned this right when you kicked off the meeting this evening, had to do with how to manage uncertainty, right? Because of things like we didn't know how long school would be closed, right? But we were trying to solve for this indeterminate period during which schools would be closed and we would have to be delivering emergency remote learning, distance learning. Some of the issues that arose had to do with school communications and managing school communications. When should they take place? How often? Who should write them? How are we going to manage family expectations? How are we going to even managing the increased volume of email traffic that our school leaders were experiencing? I've had heads who have said that their email has increased by more than 50% since the pandemic struck. How to plan for a safe return to campus, issues involving scenario planning, and as we were discussing earlier, are we going to be all online? Are we going to be all in person? Are we going to look at a hybrid approach? Health and safety, always top of mind in all of these discussions. Emergency remote learning for early grades was one of the groups for whom we held consistent meetings. In fact, our very first meeting for school leaders had to do with emergency remote learning for the early grades. And that continues to be an issue for many of our schools. Just over 50% of our schools, 55% of our schools are elementary schools. And the challenges in the younger grades were persistent. SEL amid the pandemic was another issue that schools were grappling with. How to keep students connected to their teachers and to each other. How do we do physical distancing with lower school? Physical distancing in any grade. Reveta mentioned how the heads of school and boards work together. That very important partnership, and Reveta led a session with us with another consultant entitled Strengthening Pathways to Partnership. how do we move from emergency remote learning that we all found ourselves in beginning in mid-March to delivering intentional online instruction for the fall. PPE and PPP issues arose for our schools. How to pivot from in-person lifetime events and observances, staff retirements, if there's a death in the school community, the important benchmark events for students and families like moving up ceremonies and grade level promotions and divisional promotions and graduation exercises. How to support faculty and staff, staff with school-age children or younger children when there's no childcare.
Yeah.
The economy was an issue that arose. We had families come to the school and let them know that for the first time ever, they were going to need some financial assistance in order to be able to return to the school. There were legal issues, there were HR issues, and then of course on May 25th, we had the George Floyd murder and the fallout from that, the social unrest. And so that's not by any extension a complete list, but those are a number of the top of mind issues.
So dare I say there's not an aspect to school life and the school community that has not been impacted in some way. We're going to come back to some of what you just touched on, but given all of those challenges and the very obvious concern and question around there not being a vaccine or an adequate treatment protocol yet, given that, why are schools planning to reopen for physical regular schooling? And a newly submitted question to that I think also makes sense is, how do you help parents understand why we're working so hard to get kids back into school and to have hybrid situations and options? And where does the risk, assuming the risk of that, come into play? For either one of you or both of you.
Well, let me start by saying something, and I think it's really important. The schools that parents choose for their children, they choose because they hope they will be comfortable environments in which their children will thrive. They look at the teachers, they look at the administrators, they listen to what we say when they go on their tours, they read the mission statements and philosophy. School is about relationships. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about a 3-year-old or a 17-year-old, you want them to form meaningful, supportive, caring relationships based on empathy and understanding and high-level principles of equity and access. Teachers were never taught to teach through a screen. How you develop emotional connection to students through a screen is almost impossible. And I've worked with over 140 schools over the last 4 years as a consultant. And then I've heard from about 85 of those heads of schools and colleges in the last 4 months. And one of the things that concerned them most was how, as the year progressed, the affect of the kids got flatter and flatter. The emotion went out of their faces because they were used to a teacher looking in their face and saying, "What's the matter? Come talk to me at recess," or "Come in before school tomorrow and I'll explain this to you." So everybody wants school to start again because they feel that school is a place where kids will feel more normal. And yet, we've got to be really careful. The spread of infection just in Los Angeles in the last week rose by 45%. Schools and administrators and boards have been working on multi-scenarios for weeks now. Everybody will tell you that they know how they're going to start. I would guess nobody knows, because we don't know what it's going to be like the week before school starts. And this news and the data that we're gathering is changing every day, every hour of every day. And so it's going to take a while before people can really be on a campus and be safe. And nobody wants their children on a campus. No teacher or staff person wants to be on a campus if it is not safe to be there. So we're going to have to think very carefully about how many children we bring on at a time, when we bring them on, how we bring faculty and staff, and how we physically reconfigure and schedule the day so that real learning takes place.
Excellent. Cathy, you have anything you want to add to that?
I think that says it all.
Yep. Okay. I do, though, have a question for you, Cathy. So you guys have 30 plus, Cathy alone, career in this area. How has diversity, equity, inclusion work, switching gears a little bit, evolved during your career? The question coming into the community says, when I was in school, we didn't have a name or an office dedicated to this area. And sometimes I wonder if that was better. We seemed to have less issues. So any perspective on where we have arrived and maybe how much further we have to go?
Well, what I can say is that when you say 30 years in career in independent schools, yes, it is that long, but I started when I was 12. But what I can say is, and I think everyone on the call will agree, that schools are different places in terms of their DEI work. And so I can't speak to how the work has evolved so much, but what I can talk a little bit about is some of the measurable progress that's been made and what we've seen at CAIS, certainly. And I'll just share a visual with you, if you will have a moment of patience with me for this. So this just gives you a little sense of CAIS, and just to explain this slide a little, this is CAIS median data. So for instance, where you see total teachers of color, and where you see 2014, 2015, you see the number 9. That's actually a median per school. So we're moving from a median of 9 in 2019 to one of 13 in the current school year that's just concluding. We see a 13% increase, change rather, in the percentage of students of color. We see a 44% percentage change in total teachers of color. We see a 100% percentage change in the total administrators of color. Now, when I talk about the change, please don't confuse that as me saying that the work is done or this is, great cause for celebration. It is something to acknowledge, and I think, and celebrate, and at the same time, notice that there's still a lot of work to be done. But just to have some sense of what we've seen at CIS, total faculty, staff, administrators of color, there's a percentage change of 73%. And trustees of color. I can tell you, since I started this job 6 years ago, and I would hold events for trustees, and our professional development at CIS currently serves mostly trustees and heads of school. We don't do teacher professional development. There are other organizations that do that very well. But to go into a room and hold a meeting and see the number of trustees of color and the increase in a very short period of time. And I think that that's something that schools have continued to be committed to. And then you can compare us with the NAIS median data. California is very much ahead in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, in terms of these external observable numbers in terms of the personnel. And then when you talk about top leadership, heads of school, CAIS leads the nation, where we have 46% of our heads of school are female. That compares to 39% at NAIS. And for people of color as heads, again, we would like it to be more, and it needs to be a much higher percentage. but 15% of our heads at CIS schools are people of color, and that compares with just 6% nationally. So those are some places where we have seen some measurable progress. And certainly since, when Reveta will attest, when she went into headship and, you'd go to POCC and the heads of color would be on the stage, there were less than 20 my first year working in CIS schools, and now they don't fit on the stage. So we have made some measurable progress, and I think there's still a lot of work to be done. DEI is top of mind at more and more of our schools. We have more affinity groups. We have diversity, equity, and inclusion statements on school websites. We have, more DEI practitioners in our schools, some of whom are designated full-time in the role, and some of whom attend board meetings, some of whom are members of the leadership team. And our outreach to our families has certainly shifted in the time that I've worked in independent schools. So in a number of ways, and I don't want to take up all the time here, but I do think that we have a long ways to go, but we have made some measurable progress in terms of the representation in our schools. Again, there's still a lot of work to be done beyond that.
That's it's a nice perspective, and I think a lot of our families didn't know a lot of that. Reveta, could you, to Cathy's point, could you talk a little bit more about the importance of the parent engagement and relationship with the school? One of the questions we got was, what is the best way to be included in the process of change at a private school other than asking questions and attending events? I think so many times we join these communities and we can get lost for a number of reasons, but it's so important. Maybe you could talk a little more about that.
Well, there's always going to be broader socioeconomic representation and we bring broad diversity to the schools that we go to. I think one of the most important things is to be visible, and that's hard, especially for dual career families who are working in order to be able to send their children to independent school. I mean, that's just a fact of life. But think about the ways you can volunteer and be visible in the school outside of the hours of your work, and work with the parent association and the administrators of the school to find volunteer opportunities for working parents. We had 40 different job descriptions for volunteers when I was running a school. And many of them were done on a weekend or in an afternoon after school or in an evening. You can be on an annual fund committee in the evening and make phone calls for the annual fund. You can go in and teach lessons once or twice a year about a cultural celebration that's very important and very meaningful to you. You can go read aloud to children in the library, in the classroom, or volunteer on field trips. But I think our children deserve to see us be present. And we need to find ways to be present and to meet the other parents in the school, and to not only do that, but to open our homes to them and reciprocate socially in the ways that we're able for our children and for ourselves. That's very important. I think one of the most important lessons I learned was we never had a diversity director. I became a head of school very young. There weren't families of color in the school. There were 3 when I started. And so we started a multicultural society. And one of the things that we thought about very carefully was the telling of stories. How critically important it was for people to understand our story and for us to listen to the stories of others to come to a place of greater understanding. And one of the things that I always said to faculty and staff was, every employee in the school is a diversity director. Every person has to model the values of the school and be available to children, the maintenance workers, the people answering the phone. Diversity, when it falls on the shoulders of just one person, sometimes becomes a lightning rod. And so understanding that we're hiring people and making them aware that diversity is an important part of their work and inclusion and equity goes along with that diversity is critical to our success going forward.
And I would add to that, Reveta, which everything that you said is just so true. I would ask parents that as you think about returning to school or school reopening, and school will reopen in the fall, as you think about that and starting a new school year, think about ways in which you can, as a parent, work to build a trusting relationship with your children's teachers and school leaders. And if your school does not offer the opportunities that Reveta mentioned, I know in many of the schools where I was a parent, independent school parent, which I was for every year of my kids' education, and some of the schools they attended, all of the volunteer opportunities happened during the workday, and I just couldn't participate. You know, I had to be teaching in the classroom as a Spanish teacher. I couldn't leave my students to go volunteer in another school. But that might be an opportunity for you to have some conversations with school leaders. And first of all, share your interest in being a more active participant in the school, because sometimes when parents don't show up, school leaders assume that it's because they're not interested. So I think that would be a way to kind of lean in and ask your school what they can do to be more inclusive of working parents and indicate your interest in being a more active participant and partner with your children's teachers and school leaders.
I think that's so important. We had a few questions to that very point about advocating for your children. And there's a pervasive concern of if you're not that engaged or haven't shown up to create that type of partnership just yet, and you have an area of concern, you can often feel like, I don't want to be the problem parent. I don't want to get labeled. I guess my question is, if you have something of importance that you want to talk to the administration about, what is the proper protocol for doing that, such that parents shouldn't feel stifled or not wanting and willing to do that?
Well, you know, first of all, you're not the problem parent. You're a parent with a problem. That's a big difference. And so I think you always go to the teacher first, even if the teacher is part of the problem. You always want to go, because just as we don't want people going behind our backs talking about us to someone else, teachers don't want that either. So start and walk your way up the chain. Start with the teacher. And then if you don't get the satisfactory answer, or you feel like your concerns haven't been addressed, and give it a little time, then you go to a division head or a chair of a department, an administrator in the school. And then if that doesn't work, you go to the administrator or the head of school. But work your way up the chain. Don't go to the board first. In many instances, the boards are parents just like you. And one of the things that schools often tell boards, because I do board trainings, is when you become a board and your child is in the school, you're going to lose rights as a parent. You can't walk out and complain about the school to other parents. It's your job to help fix it. You can't gossip on the sidelines of a game on the weekend. You've got to be a role model for the school. And if you do take something to a board member, know that a good board member is going to take it back to the head and let them deal with it anyway. So don't be the person that skipped all those levels and went straight to the board. Go through the channels. It'll take a little bit of time, but each step allows you to further your relationship with the individuals. You're not the problem parent. You're a parent with a problem. And during a child's school career, Wendy Mogul always said, when she wrote The Blessing of a Skinned Knee, At some point, everybody's going to have a grumpy teacher. At some point, every teacher has at least one or two grumpy parents in their classes. And so you're not going to go through school without experiencing a problem. Nobody does. But don't be the problem parent, be the parent with a problem.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Reveta, for me, that also goes back to the point about building a trusting relationship with your children's teachers and school leaders, because you don't want to show up when the problem happens and you've never shown up before. I mean, I think part of building that pathway to making these things run a little more smoothly is having a little more active participatory involvement in the greater life of your child's education.
Right. And there are ways to invite your involvement so that parents don't have to find the way themselves. You know, there are backpacks that need to be packed every year, emergency backpacks. The old stuff gets taken out and recycled and they repack new ones. They don't do that. They can do it at night. They can do it after school. They can do it early in the morning. If you can go into work late one morning and meet somebody. So there are all kinds of things in a school that need to be done if you express an interest in wanting to do them.
I love this. We had a webinar last week and one of the panelists reminded us that our schools, as lucky as we are to be there, the school's lucky to have us as well.
That's right.
We really have to adjust that thinking. I wanted to go back really quickly, Cathy, when you showed us the numbers, the statistics, we did have a question that I thought was important. As parents, we all understand how key representation is, and is there anything, or how best can Black parents in particular help recruit and retain more Black administrators and teachers? Where does that, where and how can that happen?
Well, one of the ways I think is, you know, if you're a parent at the school and you're looking to attract more teachers and administrators, you're basically a marketer for the school, right? So you are sharing the good news, the stories about your school with folks that you know that may be interested in working in independent schools. I think that just as the number one way that many families come to our schools is word of mouth, I think the same is also true for faculty and administrators of color. And the independent school world, I think, you know, quite frankly, I work for the California Association of Independent Schools. I have to spend more time explaining to people what an independent school is, what the term means. So part of it is, you know, embracing and educating people, actually. I've had to explain to independent school graduates that they had attended, adults, that they had attended an independent school. So I think there's a role for current families to play. There's a role for alums to play as well. I think alums are hugely impactful in this space. And you know, to really talk up your school and spread the word. And also, I think encourage schools to, you know, explore how they are looking to find diverse faculty and administrators, and to maybe expand their reach and their sources for finding teachers and administrators of color outside of the traditional, you know, independent school search firms, for instance.
Can I add something, Lisa? I think it's really important. Because I ran one school for 40 years and I interviewed probably hundreds of teachers of color over the years who wouldn't take the job when they found out it was a one-year contract. Independent school teachers get an annual contract. You get a contract for 1 year, and in the middle of the year, you're evaluated, and they will extend an offer for a contract for the next year. And I can't tell you the number of teachers who said to me, I have no job security if I take a one-year contract. And my reply to them was, You will always have job security if you're a good teacher, if you're a valued professional. But some of our teachers of color are very risk adverse to going into an organization where they're going to be evaluated every year. And if they're not doing a good job, they're going to be asked to leave. And so we need to encourage really good teachers to come into our schools and understand that if they do a good job, there is a place for them in a school for a long, long time. I was in the school for 44 consecutive years, and now I'm back. I loved the school and I loved the community, and I worked harder than I've ever worked at anything in my life. But I felt I had job security. And I think good teachers will always have job security.
Excellent. So speaking of parents being ambassadors, if you will, for their school community, we are seeing a lot of increased parent and student and alumni activity on social media right now. There's a lot of sharing of all kinds of racist, in particular school experiences in really public ways. And the question that was submitted is, do you feel like, Reveta in particular, do you feel like this process is good for students in terms of them at least getting some of their experiences out? And do you think it will really motivate schools to assess things in a meaningful way, especially knowing that there are people, potential new hires, board members, families looking at these comments and making some sort of judgment about it?
I think the vehicle of social media complicates this issue because it's so visible. And many of the people who are reaching out to schools are people who were in the schools many years ago. And remember that the independent school community in California is much younger. School desegregation in California public schools took place in 1970. And some of these schools were started in the 70s. But I would say to you, it's important that the schools hear your story. I'm not sure that the best way for them to hear the story is on social media, but I applaud the efforts of people to at least share their pain and to at least acknowledge that their experience was not always a positive one. But at the same time, they acknowledge that it wasn't positive. They've got to acknowledge whatever they might have gotten out of the school too. I mean, I've had letters from kids over the years who felt like they didn't have a friend, and they weren't just students of color. They were children who found the adjustment to my school to be difficult at times. But I think one of the things that we have to do is work for the change that we want to see in our schools. And it's going to take time. And what particularly complicates it is we're trying to get open again so that we can have these conversations. Teachers are spending time not only thinking about how they're going to be back on campus, but how they're going to improve the quality of their teaching if they can't be back on campus in the fall. And administrators and boards are spending countless hours trying to figure out COVID and pandemic safety and distancing and seating and schedules and supplies and budgets. And so this issue is coming at a time when people sincerely want to deal with it and don't know how they can take on one more thing. And so it's going to take a little time and a little patience. But I haven't talked to a single head in the heads that I've talked to around the country that don't think this issue is central to not only their existence, but to their sustainability. I think that's why we saw the diversity in the marches that we saw this time. People are eager to have our systems and our institutions and our organizations embrace diversity and be more equitable for all kinds of people, but particularly because Black lives do matter. And everybody's willing to say that out loud now and believe it because we watched them kill a Black man in our homes through our TVs. So I think this is important work. I think some of the demands that are being made are unreasonable and untenable, especially in the face of trying to get schools started. But I would not dare say that it isn't time for us to educate schools about the problems that students have had over the years. And some of these stories are coming to light and people have not heard them before. Remember what I said about we need to tell our stories, and we also need to listen to the stories of others.
And to that point, Reveta, we know that some of these students that are speaking through social media are students that have not been in touch with their schools since they were graduated.
Right.
And so I think this is an opportunity also for schools to acknowledge that students care enough to speak up, to share their stories, and that in response, schools need to figure out a way to listen.
And they're trying.
Yes.
Now, some schools are trying harder than others, you know, and just, you know, it's sort of the old adage, every reaction gets a reaction.
Yes.
But I think with perseverance and patience and tempering our voices and sharing our stories and listening to the stories of others, we're going to see real progress. And we're going to see schools that are caring institutions that are going to listen to these voices and make sure that institutionally they do the changes that will be important for those alums in particular to see happening in schools. And then as we see them, we have to applaud them. We have to support them.
So we're nearing 7:47, so I just want to keep this moving, and I have 3 board-related questions I want to kind of lump together, so bear with me. The first one is, it's trying to ask what point do school boards get more involved in daily decisions of the school. The gist of it is, how do parents make sure boards are aware of real issues that they may be dealing with? And then we have a few people on the phone who are new to boards in schools, and they're wondering if you have any advice. And similarly, how do parents get on that pathway to being considered for board leadership?
Well, Cathy, you want to start?
Well, one of the ways certainly to get on the pathway is to, it goes back to participating actively in the greater life of the school. And one of the ways that parents often end up on boards is they will be invited to participate in a committee or an initiative of the board. And it's basically a way for the board to, you know, see if this person, you know, is actually going to be a potential contributing member were they to be elected to the board. So that's kind of like testing the waters, both for the parent, the prospective future trustee, but also for the board. And Reveta, do you want to pick up from there?
Yeah, you know, one of the things is that you want to fully participate in the life of the school. You want to pay your tuition on time. Okay. If you want to join the board are fiduciaries. They see to the finances of the school, and they also are the futurists for the school. They look at the mission and the strategic vision of the school, and they want to make sure that school is going to be around for the next 20 or 40 or 60 years. So they're thinking about both the business side of the school and the philosophy and the mission and the values. They want to know that you understand how the school operates. The board is not a place to learn how the school operates. You want to learn as much as you can about how the school operates by asking questions as a member of the parent community and being a good parent partner. It doesn't matter. When I was looking for new board members, it never mattered to me the size of the contribution they made. Some board members were going to come on and write huge annual fund checks. Others were financial aid families coming onto the board who wrote very small checks, but they wrote one every year. And nobody had to dog them to get them to participate at every level of the school. So you want to make sure that there is a consistency to your involvement. And that, as I said, you're not the angry parent at the back of the room not speaking. You're the parent who, with reason and with tact, goes in and asks the questions and works with the school to get the problem solved. And that's what it's going to take. I don't mind a parent who's upset, because that's an honest emotion, but I do mind a parent who won't let the upset go when the school is making conscientious efforts to really work with the family and work with the teacher and work with the child to solve the problem. We can't do anything if you're not honest and open in your communications. And so that's what we need. We're looking for good partners. And the relationship between the board and the head is a marriage. And I tell people all the time, it's an arranged marriage. It's not a love match, it's an arranged marriage. So we have to learn to live with one another, and you have to learn to live with the school that you've chosen for your child. And if you're not happy, let the school help you find other places where you think you will be happier.
Excellent. Cathy, do you want to add anything to that?
Nope.
I do just have one question that kind of came in on the tail end of that is, what would you say to prospective Black board members who may be feeling as if, you know, they've been asked or they're being considered to sit on the board, but they're also going to be expected to carry the load of doing a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion work at that level?
Well, I actually have, in the schools where I've worked where there have been trustees of color, I have not seen that be an expectation. I have seen, certainly I think there's interest in bringing a person of color on the board, not just because they're looking to increase the diversity in terms of people of color representation, but they're also looking for different perspectives, different skill sets that that person also brings along with this added piece, which is the being a person of color. I have not, and you know, I've worked in day schools and boarding schools and East Coast, West Coast, San Francisco, Los Angeles. I have not seen people of color who are on boards being asked to carry or lead that work. And Reveta, you may have a different perspective.
No, it's more the parental expectation, right? I'm definitely guilty of that. Like if I have issues or questions or whatever, I'm like, well, who's on the board that's Black that I could, you know? So I think it's a parental thing, maybe.
You just want to make sure, because one of the things you're going to be asked as a board member is, what skills and interests do you bring to our board that you would like to work on? There's finance, there's an academic committee, there's strategic planning, there's operations, there's investments, there's buildings and grounds, there's accreditation task forces when the school's going through the accreditation. And you know what? Just as you want your teacher to be multifaceted in teaching your child, board members need to be multifaceted and have multiple interests as they come onto our boards. We're not looking for people of color to be the lightning rod around diverse interests on the board. We bring our culture with us. We bring our background and our racial history and our religious orientation and our gender orientation with us when we come onto the boards. That's who we are. But that's not the only work we're capable of doing. And so I think we want to be seen for all the skills we bring to our boards and to the work that we do on them. And schools are looking for interested, engaged, energetic people who want to participate fully in the life of the school. And being a board member can give you that opportunity.
Excellent. So I think we're nearing that time where I need to start, we need to start thinking about our last question. And one of you mentioned a short time ago, tuition. And I think in our last webinar with you, Reveta, I think this also came up, parents are still trying to reconcile the cost for school, given that, this was a question that came in, what feels like quote unquote substandard educational experience for my child. I think that the question really speaks to, though, at what point will families, can they expect for schools to recalibrate cost? There might be more increased costs now, but at some point, when we've figured this out, when are we taking a step back to look at cost? How will the new normal for schools, whatever it ends up being, how will that affect tuition? And maybe when can parents expect schools to maybe reevaluate that? Is that a conversation going on at the board level, I'm assuming?
You know what? I think we've got to be really realistic. When it costs more to put gas in the tank of your car, do you go into the gas station and put in the wrong octane because it's cheaper? No, because then your car won't work as well. Everyone did, I think, a good faith effort. This was really hard on kids. It was really hard on parents. You know who it was hardest on? It was hardest on teachers, most of whom had to pivot over a weekend and teach in a way they had never been trained to teach. And not only did they have to teach in that way, they had to teach to groups of children, for the most part, at the same time, when they knew that there were multiple learning styles and abilities in those classrooms, that normally they would go up and down the rows and give them different kinds of individualized instruction. So there's no bargain basement discount for the education that's been delivered in the last 5 months. And you know what? Schools' costs are rising. Their insurances are going up. They're having to buy the supplies, which we talked about. And the most important investment a school makes is in keeping the quality of the teaching staff. And some of the best teachers in the world struggle the hardest with distance learning and remote learning. Some of the most gifted art teachers couldn't figure out a way to deal with an art lesson with kids who were sitting away and didn't have supplies to do the art projects. And then you talk about the socioeconomic difference in the classes and kids who needed not only supplies, but equipment and broadband access, and in some cases, food. There were schools delivering food to families that didn't have it, that were food insecure. So I'm saying all that to say, your individual school may cut you some slack. They may give you some discounts. They may give you a variety of payment plans, but they didn't save money by going remotely, because they still had to keep paying the expenses of the school and most of the expenses of the school. So what I would ask for, if I were you, is a course on financial literacy for parents, where the school opens the operating budget and teaches you about the expenses of running the school. And you get a good grounding in what it really costs and why they don't raise the tuition above what they raise in the annual fund, and why the annual fund budget allows them to keep the tuition lower and not charge what it fully costs to run the school. But if you're looking for discounts, I would say to you, find a cheaper school.
And wow.
I'm sure there are heads all over the city cringing. Right?
No, I smell a webinar, financial literacy webinar.
Well, and to Reveta's point, the number one expense in our schools is teacher salaries. And as Reveta said, maintaining the quality, the level of teacher quality that we aspire makes it incumbent upon our schools to be able to be competitive in a competitive market for teachers, and that and paying our teachers a fair wage so they can afford to live within, somewhat reasonable driving distance of the schools where they work.
And remember, it's not just what they get paid, it's their benefits, it's their insurance, it's their retirement contributions. And most schools ask teachers to match their retirement allotments so that they're contributing to their retirement, and so is the school. So that package is usually about 76% of the budget of the school is faculty and staff and administrators' salaries, benefits, and retirement.
Wow. Well, we are at 8 o'clock, ladies and gentlemen, so we're going to wrap it up. But there were so many questions we did not get to. So I'm going to invite you ladies back in the near future, especially because everything is constantly changing and what it looks like in the fall might be different. So thank you again for being here today. We're going to post the link again on our PSV YouTube channel. And again, thank you so much, Cathy and Reveta.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Anytime. Take care. Thanks, everyone.
Stay well.
Amen.